Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. John Owen talks about sports and movies. Thank you for checking out today's video. I always appreciate the support. Let's get into it. So, 2024 has been a huge year for X-Men. I feel like we're kind of experiencing an X-Men revival between Deadpool, Wolverine, the revival of the X-Men 90s cartoon, an X-Men 97, and just a general excitement of this being one of the biggest superhero properties. Outside of, I would say, arguably right now, the Avengers, I would say the X-Men is the biggest, most well-known superhero property. And with the impending introduction of the X-Men into the MCU, today we're going to go over my personal comprehensive MCU X-Men wish list, lineups, villains, storylines, and pitches, and more fun stuff like that. But make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss out on any of the fun. Leave your thoughts down below. What do you want to see from the MCU X-Men? What do you not want to see? Things of that nature. But without further ado, let's get into my do's and do nots of what I want from the MCU and their X-Men. So first off, I think what would be really cool is if they did a Magneto and Professor X solo project where it's like kind of like X-Men First Class, except there's even more focus on them. And they're not even necessarily trying to build an X-Men team. I think that Magneto is compelling enough to have his own solo project. I don't necessarily know if Professor X is. I mean, I think there could be, right? But I think it would be not as entertaining. But I think the two of them together, both of their origins, basically X-Men First Class without like, which I know that's like a huge part of the movie, um but without like trying to build like an actual X-Men team at that given time. Just like to show like their friendship, their relationship. I would not I they call them friends is, I don't know what word to describe them as. They are above friends, above enemies. They've transcended into this other level of depth of their relationship. And I think this is the most important relationship for the MCU, or the most important dynamic for the MCU to nail, just because like I personally believe, and I haven't read like any X-Men comics, but just like X-Men media that I've consumed, these two were the foundation, and their relationship is the foundation of kind of any type of X-Men adaptation that is going to be, or that is put forth. So I think it's really important for them to do them justice, and to really have these guys like super, super, super fleshed out. I don't have any like particular casting or anything like that. I've seen a bunch of people thrown around. I think potentially if you m- casted like a 40, 50 year old, they could play like both like a younger and an older version of the character, so you wouldn't have to cast two separate times like they did for the Fox X-Men movies. I'm not exactly sure how you would get around that, but I think these two, their dynamic is just so compelling and so interesting that a solo project with that focuses just on the two of them would be really great. And also, I think it would allow them to not feel repetitive of the Fox X movies, where Magneto's the first villain of the first X-Men movie, which I think he's gonna have to be involved, but I think you can kind of skirt around him being like the main villain of it and introducing him that way, and not feel repetitive to the Fox X-Men movies. Next, I know this is not gonna happen. I know there's no shot in hell that this actually happens, but I would really love if they didn't use Wolverine in the very first X-Men like team lineup movie. Now, I totally think that it would be great if he had a solo movie, even if it was before the X-Men, but like the first X-Men movie. But Wolverine is by far and away the most popular X-Men character, and rightfully so. Wolverine's great. I absolutely love Wolverine, and I want him to be on the team eventually. But I do feel like the Fox movies were plagued by this over reliance and this overemphasis on Logan as a character. Um, I mean, he just takes up so much of the story in those Fox X movies, and I feel like it really kind of diminishes the impact and role that characters like Cyclops or Storm or even Beast, staple X-Men characters had in those films, like because there was such this focus on Charles and um and Magneto and then Wolverine and then Jean to an extent as well, that a lot of the really other great wonderful X-Men characters got kind of shifted over to the side. And so I know there's no shot this happens, but I would really love if they held back, restrained themselves, didn't use Wolverine in the first one. And then after that, you put him in every other X Men movie there is. Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think if you gave that first movie the room to breathe, you could really, really develop those characters who got shafted, or who got sidelined in kind of the Fox movies. Speaking of first movie, this is kind of like what I would like to see in a first movie lineup, and villain. So if they don't use Wolverine and they don't use Magneto in this specific movie as the main villain, I think this is kind of what I would love to see. Let's start with the villain. So Mr. Sinister is arguably at least I would think, the biggest X-Men villain that has not been adapted in live action yet. Um, we've got Magneto, we've gotten the Sentinels, we've gotten Trask, we've gotten Apocalypse, we've gotten Shaw, Hellfire Club, Emma Frost, Sabretooth, Mystique. We've gotten like all these huge, huge, huge X-Men villains. Mr. Sinister is the only one that we haven't gotten yet in live action. Especially after watching the X-Men animated series, he is so, I mean, he's sinister. There's no other way to put it. But I find him so sickening and so compelling, though, that I think it would be great if they gave him the first crack at being the big bad of an X-Men movie. He's waited his turn. He's way more. I mean, he is more than capable of being the main villain. So I think he could easily slide in to being um the main bad guy of the first X-Men movie. Now, as far as the X-Men lineup, you gotta have Professor X, obviously. Cyclops, Jean, Storm, those are non-negotiables pretty much on any X-Men team. Um, and then I would like to see Iceman. We'll get to more what I want from Iceman later, and then Angel, Kitty Pryde, Nightcrawler, and Rogue. Um, I like Rogue kind of in both capacities. In the like animated series, she's like an adult. In the Fox X-Men movies, she's like a student. She's a kid. I think both of those could work good. But I think I would like to see her as an adult. I liked her kind of better in that capacity, and then also you can elevate Kitty Pryde up to that kind of like young X-Men view that we have for Rogue. I want Bobby to be like a younger X-Men, and I would also want Angel to be in his like mid-20s, late early 20s, somewhere in there. And then like have Scott, Jean, Storm, and Professor X obviously be like full-fledged adults. Oh, and Nightcrawler as well. He can be adult, even if he's a little younger. Nightcrawler and Rogue need to be at the same age because I think it'd be cool if they adapted Mystique being their mom as well. And then Beast to be in kind of like a supporting role. Maybe he like works for the government and he's already like moved away from being like at the school, but he's still involved in the movie. And then later down the line, he can come back and be like a full fledged X-Men again. I don't think this necessarily has to be like an origin or like a first class type thing. Um, I think if they wanted to do like like an even older movie, like in between the Professor X Magneto thing that I pitched in this movie, and that was the first class, I think that'd be cool. But I don't think this movie necessarily has to do that or be that like at all. But I think this is the lineup I would like to see. Just because a lot of these characters didn't get as much time in the Fox X movies, and they're still so critical to the X Men mythos. I mean, I would say Scott and Jean outside of Logan and then Cherrick, probably the biggest X-Men characters that we have as far as like the how much they've impacted the lore between Dark Phoenix, Cable, Hope, the Summers family, Justin Corsair, Havoc, Vulcan. They just have bring so much to the table, and Cyclops got horrifically just done dirty in the Fox X movie. So I think if you went with this line, this would be a good place to start. And then you can add on. You can bring in Colossus and Wolverine and whoever else you might want to bring along the way. Okay, do not do Dark Phoenix again. The X-Men animated series in the '90s was they handled Dark Phoenix so well, but there was so much world building that had gone into that with the Shi'ar and all their space stuff that I just don't see the MCU being able to have that type of runway to be able to build up to that type of level of a Dark Phoenix story. We've already also seen two cracks at Dark Phoenix twice, and it hasn't worked. It's a really difficult story to pull off, and unless you have a massive runway and a massive build up time like the X Men animated series was allowed to do, it's just so hard. It's just really hard to do. They've done it twice. They did it bad both times. Um, Now, if there's a studio that could pull it off, do think it's the MCU? Yeah, absolutely. But I just don't think people want to see this again. I simply and I don't want to see it again. If I want to watch Dark Phoenix, I would be more than happy to just watch the stretch from the animated series again and call it a day. Speaking of Jean Grey, let's make the Omega level mutants Omega level. In the Fox X movies, Jean is the only, I think they call it level 5, but basically the only Omega level mutant in that, and they had three others right there between Magneto, Storm, and Iceman. This one's like just silly, or not silly, but just quick, but just let them reach their full level power, especially with the budget and the special effects and kind of support that these MCU movies are gonna have for these X Men characters. I think you're gonna be able to really have some really great, cool displays of their powers, and so I want to see that come to fruition on screen. Do not do Avengers versus X Men. The versus movies are really hard for me. They can either be like Civil War, which I love, or they can be BVS, which I don't even really like the extended version of that movie. I don't like this. I know that there's gonna be some force that they have to unify against, and like you just know like intrinsically, unless they like actually have the courage to do it, that they're gonna have to team up at the end against some greater force that's gonna be shoehorned in later, and I just am not interested in it. Also mainly because I don't know exactly what the MCU is gonna do with the Avengers moving forward potentially. Like, are they gonna reboot? Are we gonna have like kind of a admittedly, I don't really know who is going to be on the next Avengers lineup, but it won't be like as cool without Cap, without what let me put that, without Steve and without Tony. I don't think Thor is going to make it past like Secret Wars in like some capacity. I just don't think that the Avengers side is going to be at full force and who exactly they're going to be able to use or like what exactly they're going to do. This movie is going to come after Secret Wars for sure. I feel like but I'm just really not interested in seeing the Avengers fight the X-Men. I'm just not. Just not. So I definitely want some solo projects for the various X-Men characters. Now, obviously not every single character could like hold down their own solo project, but I definitely think there are more like in the or there are more characters than just Wolverine that deserve and could hold down a solo project. Now, I totally want to see Wolverine again get his own solo project, but in the Fox universe, he was the only one that got like origin films or solo films. Their initial plan was to have more of those developed, but they just didn't for various reasons. But I totally think it'd be really cool to see like Cyclops and Jean get a project. The Summers lore, the more I learn about them, the crazier it gets. But I definitely think like, especially building off of what Mr. Sinister does in the first movie, in this hypothetical first movie, I totally think they could have a solo project where they're dealing with, their relationship because it is so torturous and so has got so much turmoil with Logan trying to get in there and Scott's been involved with Emma Frost before. I totally would. A, think it could work, and B, think it'd be really interesting to see like a Madeline Pryor, Goblin Queen type situation and watch Cyclops and Jean kind of get over that. I loved that arc from the X-Men 97 series, or that storyline. I thought it was really cool. Madeline Pryor honestly scared the shit out of me. But I think it could work really good. And they're just so interesting. They just like, so you can introduce Nathan, which then if we get Nathan, same thing happens. Then we get Cable down the line, and like stuff like that. So I think that they could definitely hold it down, and it would make up for Cyclops just being absolutely done dirty in the Fox films. Wolverine has gotten 3 solo films between X-Men's Origins Wolverine, The Wolverine, and Logan. Um, but this man's got so much lore, so much depth. I would love to see like a movie with Alpha Flight in there. The Canadian kind of superhero team, especially North Star, some queer representation. And then also Omega Red. He was so cool in the animated series. He's gonna be back in the next seasons of X-Men 97. I've got a feeling. So a movie where he's the bad guy and Alpha Flight's involved. You throw Sabretooth in there, I'll be there opening night. I think a Gambit project between Channing Tatum's Deadpool and Wolverine appearance and his unfortunate death in X-Men 97. Um, I think his popularity is high enough to where he could get a solo project. And that can also be, and in this, I would like to see, him and Rogue kind of start fostering their relationship. The bad guys could be the Theed of Gilves. It could be like about him leaving and finding Rogue, and Rogue helping kind of him find redemption within himself, or at least start down that path. I think that'd be really cool. And then my last idea, I think like a young X-Men. I don't know like what like the Young Justice or Young Avengers equivalent to the X-Men are, but you get like Bobby and Kitty Pryde kind of lead a group of younger X-Men on some type of fun adventure. Maybe they get stuck in the arcade. Maybe they have to bust out like the older vets out of like Mojo's arcade game. I think that'd be really fun. You can introduce Jubilee, and have her on there, and then Sunspot, or whatever other like typically younger X-Men you want to throw in there. I think that would just be kind of something fun and lighthearted. Not nothing too crazy, but I think it would be kind of a fun project to allow the younger members of the team to kind of be lifted up. Okay, I don't want to see Mystique as like a pseudo Cyclops like she was in like the second timeline is what I'm going to refer to in Fox movies. And what do I mean by that? Like Cyclops outside of Xavier is the leader of the X-Men. I mean, it's his team. And Mystique was kind of in it was that role in like the Michael Fassbender, James McAvoy, those versions of the character, Jennifer Lawrence. And I didn't hate it necessarily, but I don't think I found it compelling enough to be like to do it again. I just don't see that as Mystique's role. Um I think her in X2 is like absolutely a perfect adaptation, perfect representation of the character. I just want to see Mystique be a bad guy. Just be sly, be a great spy, use her powers for herself, work for Magneto and the Brotherhood of Mutants, and call it a day. I think she's super compelling in that role. That's what I'd see her as. Side note, I think her attraction to Logan is so funny to me, and I would love, or so intriguing to me, and I'd love to see it in these adaptations, or in the MCU's version of these characters. All right. Next, do make Beast blue full time and Iceman gay. I'm putting these together, so I absolutely just do not like the Nicholas Holt not being in Beast form. It feels lazy. It feels lazy to me. I understand the insecurity of like not being able to feel accepted by society because of your mutation. And I also know that at times Beast hasn't always been blue in the comics, like especially like his like beginnings. And I but I just want to see him blue. Like it's so cool. The I think the look that they go in X3 The Last Stand is perfect. I think if we got that in live action again, that'd be great. I think it's just great to see Beast persevere, even though he does have this very obvious mutation that does hinder his ability to be accepted by society. Um, but I just want to see Beast be blue. there's a lot of white dudes in these movies in this franchise. Let's just go ahead and make them blue. And as far as Iceman, I actually don't hate Rogue and Bobby in the Fox X-Men movies. I think they actually work together pretty well, even though he like acts really weird in Last Stand. Don't like the way he did my girl Rogue then. But Iceman is one of the most like well-known queer characters in comics, and so I think like seeing that represented on screen, it needs to happen. By the time this movie comes out, it'll be 2026 at the earliest. So hell, it might be 2027, 28, 29. We might be in the 2030s before we might get an MCU X-Men movie. He's gonna have to be gay. He's going to have to be gay. It's just, it's time. It's time. And do not, this is a do not, but do not have Gene out him. That is, we don't need that we don't need to do that to Bobby. We don't need to do that to Gene. I don't like that. We don't need to do that. Let's just avoid that. All right. Another do not make Cyclops lame. My big, and this is just like a personal grievance because Cyclops is my favorite X-Men character. The way that the Fox X-Men movies treated Scott Summers is horrific. Horrific. Basically, he is the side he's the side piece in his own relationship. I mean, hell, if we're gonna have them all three be romantically tangled, let's just make it polyamorous. Let's just commit to it. But don't make Scott the side piece in this whole in his own relationship. Let's not do that. And then in the like the second timeline where he's younger, I just oh, and then James Marsden Cyclops, like his death is awful, and off-screen death. That was a horrible thing that plagued the Fox movies was off-screen deaths. It was so stupid, but so he just handled horribly in those movies. I think he's just completely awfully bad in Apocalypse and in Dark Phoenix. He doesn't get to be the leader. You don't even try to step. You don't even get to see him try to step up and be the type of leader that he eventually becomes. But I think Cyclops gets kind of like misrepresented as this like, or people say he's not compelling because he's just like kind of a Boy Scout. But I mean he is a Boy Scout, but I think what separates kind of him and Cap is I have found that at least in my what I've consumed from him, Cyclops maybe doesn't have that like necessarily wit or charm that Cap like Steve Rogers has because Cyclops feels a lot more responsibility and a lot more burden to lead the X-Men as Charles's or one of either the first or one of Charles's first students, and he feels such an obligation and such a burden to lead them. And he's so cool in the X-Men in animated series. Like, there's just no way you can't say he is. I love playing with him in Marvel Ultimate Alliance. He's just a really cool character. He's got, like I mentioned before, the Summers family tree. This right here could be an entire franchise in itself, just right here. Just all their family and Cable and Hope and all of them all all together. But as they just don't need to make Cyclops lame because he's not lame. I think you can make him compelling without turning him into like being super witty or not within kind of his characterization that the X-Men animated series has. As long as they don't do this, I'm gonna be a happy camper. Adapt some lesser used villains, absolutely. So we got two versions of Magneto, we got Trask, we got the Sentinels, we got three different actors to play Stryker, and I still want all of them in these movies. Of course, naturally, they're famous, but but the X-Men have such interesting villains that there's just no reason to not adopt them. Mr. Sinister, I mentioned him earlier. Mojo, I mentioned briefly. I think is just a really fun. He would never be like a main threat, but just like a fun little side thing. I think would be so much fun. Sauron, I really liked him from the Savage Land, all those animated series, and then Nimrod and Bastion. Like we're gonna have Sentinels. They were really cool. I thought Bastion was so effing scary, so daunting in the in the X-Men 97. I think it'd be great to see him. There's just too many X-Men villains for them to go back to the pot. Without introducing these new ones as well. Do not cast someone under 6 foot to play Apocalypse slash don't rush his intro. I know Oscar Isaac tried his best to do what he could with that Apocalypse script and being 5'9", but Apocalypse is huge. Like he is supposed to be this. I mean, he's ginormous. He's at least like twice as tall, just in his base form, than any other of the other X-Men. Um, so don't make him short. Make it like obviously there's not someone that's just like pure height that's gonna be able to do it. They're gonna do some like Thanos just Broly type thing, but I think they definitely need to do that. I appreciate their attempt at just trying to make it prosthetics, but don't 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 do that. Don't do that. And then as far as Don't Rush his intro, I really don't think, and this is a point I'll make here in a little bit, but I really don't think that Apocalypse should be a villain in the first three X-Men movies. Like, they just need to make more of these than just a trilogy. We'll get to that in a second, but he needs to be like they've built it up, and he like kind of like a final threat for them, as I feel like where Apocalypse should be. I mean, let's see, Apocalypse didn't wasn't introduced in those Fox movies until they got like 6 movies into the timeline. So I definitely think they just need to not rush him into these movies. Let's just see. I want to see the Savage Land. I want to see Genosha. They're both really cool. They're interesting corners of X-Men lore. I think it'd be great, especially Genosha. Like because the mutants are often so divided. How do they handle with, or how do they handle the concept of having to be politically united, at least on a global front? How do they deal with sovereignty, in their own nation? I think it'd be really cool if we got both of those. And I definitely feel like Genosha would definitely happen, but I'd like to see the Savage Land as well. Do not link the X gene to the Eternals. I've been seeing some stuff about this. I hate this. I absolutely hate this. Um, I just don't find the Eternals and their mythos interesting. I know the Eternals is how we're getting adamantium into the MCU. Um, but I just don't find them compelling. I think the best way, this is also like semi related to this, I guess. I think the best way to introduce the X-Men is if they had a X-Men movie before Secret Wars comes out in 2027. I know they haven't announced anything, but there's a lot of openings in the 2026 and 2027 slate that they just haven't announced. So I feel like there's potential for an X-Men movie to be there. You introduce them before Secret Wars in their own universe, and then whenever eventually Secret Wars happens and it collides, and then I anticipate at the end of Secret Wars, like all the universes collide, and then they all kind of fold into one, and then we only get one mainline universe with no multiverse shenanigans moving forward. You can kind of fold this X-Men universe into the main timeline, and then have them go for there. You can have the X Gene be its own completely thing without ever linking it to the Eternals. I think that'd be the best way to go about it, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do this. But I just don't like this at all because I don't want, because the Eternals has not been very well received by like the public and MCU fans in general. It's just not a property people are interested in, and I don't want the X-Men to have their wagon hitched to the Eternals. And then one of the last things I'm going to mention is I want the Morlocks, and I want them to acknowledge the hypocrisy of discrimination versus um like superhero appraisal and love. I think the Morlocks serve as a good waking up call to some members of the X-Men. And this gets called out quite a bit in the show, but like Charles and Scott and Jean, and Storm, they really believe in this idea that humans and mutants can peacefully coexist, but that's because their mutations don't, like they can hide. And Mystique talks about this a lot, especially in First Class, how they can hide, and if they don't want to, they don't have to show that they're mutants, and not everyone gets to do that. And that's why other mutants have a harder time accepting that type of goal, because they're constantly under persecution because they can't hide. They're a mutant all the time. Charles and Scott, or not Scott. Scott does believe in that, but Scott can't just like hide because he's got his glasses. But they can assimilate easier, or they can code switch and be fine. But not every mutant can do that. So I think that's why I really want the Morlocks to be in the MCU, so they can like acknowledge that. I think that'd be like a cool plot point. Think it could be a point of growth for the mutants with less obvious mutations. And then also in the same vein, it has, and this makes sense because the X-Men are an allegory for bigotry, and bigotry doesn't make sense, right? Like we know that, like it doesn't. I don't understand. It's just not something that makes sense. How, but the X-Men get persecuted for their powers, but the regular Avengers and the other superheroes don't. Tony's so cool and Cap's so cool and Thor, and none of them are persecuted for having their powers, and the X-Men are, but the X-Men are born with these powers and can't help it, right? Which is the same thing as the discrimination that we see in the real world for things like race, sexual orientation, gender, things of that nature, things we can't control, but we get discriminated against it. And so I would love to see that kind of hypocrisy get called out, because I know like whoever the next Avengers lineup is, or whatever future Avengers lineups are, they are going to interact with the X-Men. And I would love to see some hypocrisy get called out. I would love to see it because it's true. And it so relates heavy to the real world. And I just want to see it on screen. Okay, and then lastly, my last point, my last wish list is do not cap these films at a trilogy. Even just as far as like X-Men movies, they had 7. Um, and they, granted, they used Dark Phoenix twice, but it took them 7 to get through like even just a small portion of um the X-Men storylines that they even could adapt. And then we've seen the MCU do this already. With the Thor films, we're gonna get a Spider-Man 4. We're getting a Captain America 4 as well. So we've already seen this happen. So, and I don't expect them to do this, but I think there's just too many compelling characters, too many compelling storylines for this to be capped at a trilogy. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I always appreciate the support. Like, comment, subscribe so you never miss out on any of the fun. Check the link content and have a great day.